I'm John-Howard-Worsley. My card says I'm an artist, author and riddle rattler. That's John-Howard-Worsley. However, my old wartime identity card says something a little different.
There we are then. My real name is Wright. I adopted the Worsley pen name when I wrote the His and Treasure book, Spirit of the Stones. This was back in the early 1980s. I hid real diamond talismans throughout the Isle of Wight, and clues to the whereabouts were in the codes and riddles of the pages. The main treasure was called the Great White Eye Talisman. It had a 1-carat blue diamond now worth over £6,500. This has been claimed. It was hidden in the roots of an old tree. There were also just over 40 smaller white eye talismans worth around £40 each. Where did I hide them? Well, that'll be the subject of another movie later, perhaps. There are 19 yet to be discovered. For the moment, I want to show you some other treasures and a little drama of past times. Steephill Cove is situated just a short, pleasant walk along the cliff path west of Ventnor on the Isle of Wight. You may approach the cove by means of a fairly new causeway by the water's edge. Little known, the cove can offer varied moods, but always interesting. On this particular day in early August, the tide is high and rolls with a refreshing swell. And when the tide is out, sandy rock pools divert a troubled mind from all cares. Pleasures are simple, paddling or perhaps fishing for shrimps and crabs. It is an ideal place to spend a summer's day. With its many old-time features, Steephill Cove is a delight for both young and old. Besides being a place for holidays, like old times, the cove remains a base for local fishermen, and their bounty can be sampled in the form of seafood at several traditional venues. One such place is Ginevra, a cottage now owned by Dave and Margaret Wheeler. This was originally built by my great-grandfather Charles Blake, who lived there with his wife Jane. My own mother, my Aunt Edith and Uncle Stan, when children, were brought up there by the old couple. In later years my grandfather Joe Howard lived in a small hut at the bottom of the garden. Joe was also a fisherman, and he found brief fame when he saved and nursed a stricken seabird. It became his pet, which he named Bill. A national newspaper at the time reported the bird as being an albatross, and this is the story so proudly told by my mother when I was a child. Was it an albatross? Well, you can judge that for yourself. I never dared say otherwise. Having been nurtured with this romantic tale, in my later life I decided to paint a picture of Joe and his albatross, and write a short story based on the facts. I combined the characters of my great-grandfather and my grandfather Joe as one person. I added great-grandmother Jane and the children to spin the yarn a little further. And, of course, the story had to include the legendary Money Beach. This is an Isle of Wight bay where after storms old Spanish coins are washed ashore.
He nursed it back to health, and he thought that the albatross brought him luck. And eventually he found what's called the Money Beach. And the fun of the book is for the reader to discover where that beach is.
But there really was a Money Beach.
Oh yes, the locals call it something slightly different, and they keep quiet about it, I can assure you of that.
It turns out that old Joe had an eye for publicity, for about a year after the book was published, a reader discovered an old postcard in a curio shop in Eastbourne. The card depicted the bird with a handwritten holiday message proudly proclaiming that the writer had met Joe and seen Bill the albatross. The card had a small newspaper cutting attached by means of a rusty pin. It was a report of the sad demise of the famous bird. Now, in his latter years, old Joe would often look out to sea and remember his pet. He was a great spinner of yarns and popular with visiting children. As the horizon grew darker with the clouds of World War II, other things occurred at the cove. It was here on August the 8th, 1940, at the start of the Battle of Britain, that the first German airplane to crash on the Isle of Wight was brought down. It was one of Hitler's terror weapons, a Stuka dive bomber. With many others, it had been attacking a small merchant convoy off Ventnor. This was the Peewit convoy. The German rear gunner, Unterofficer Schubert, had been badly wounded, and his pilot, Unterofficer Pittroff, had tried to land near the Royal National Hospital just behind the cove. As the German plane banked overhead, an enraged Alan Twigg grabbed his Daisy air rifle and took a pot shot. A keen eye may spot this action in the shadows of my painting, Stuka over Steephill Cove. Also shown is the Hawker Hurricane flown by Pilot Officer P.L. Parrott of 145 Squadron, who shot and chased the German down. The Luftwaffe pilot was desperate to put down on the only reasonably clear area along the cliff edge. He bounced the wheels of the plane off a low hill in the hospital grounds, hopped over a boundary fence and careered over the rough ground beyond. The Stuka ended up with little damage in a thick hedge. Rudolf Schubert was given a funeral at Ventnor attended by a squadron leader and 16 men from the Royal Air Force. His coffin was draped with the German colours, and the last post and reveille were sounded. He was only 19 years old. The Ventnor Royal National Hospital was eventually pulled down and its grounds turned into delightful botanic gardens. All is worth a visit, but when you come, please spare a little thought for the drama of those past times. Finally, Spirit of the Stones is now out of print, but copies are often found on eBay. The remaining undiscovered 19 diamond talismans are unlikely to be found. I hid them, and after all those years, even I can't find them. They are now known as the Lost Talismans of Spirit of the Stones. The book, Joseph's Magic Albatross, prints of my painting of old Joe with his albatross in his boat, the Isle of Wight wartime map, and prints of the Stuka over Steephill Cove, which include a full story sheet about the incident, are all still available. For further details, please see my website, www.warbirdart.demon.co.uk. Or why not Google me? Just do a Google image search using my name in quotes, John-Howard-Worsley, and don't forget those quotation marks. You will discover many treasures. Thanks for viewing.